Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Leathertainment podcast. We have Debbie Burton here with us, and we're going to discuss how to read labels when leather shopping to make better conscious decisions in your leather purchases. So, I wanted to welcome Debbie and thank you for being here to help people understand a little better on this episode. She's a veteran of the industry, and before I go on too much, I will let her introduce herself briefly, and then we will get to it.
Thank you for the welcome. I'm really pleased to be here on behalf of Leather Naturally. I think my story of how I got into the leather industry is quite similar to a few people who say they just got into it by accident, and that's what happened to me. I was working in the sports industry. It was at the time when there was a big battles between Nike and Reebok on which was the best trainer to have, and I worked as a sports buyer for a big chain in the UK. And I saw this position with the company I work for now, Fitards, who wanted someone to launch their performance sports leather into the footwear market. And I thought, well, that sounds kind of interesting and like a fun thing to do for a couple of years. And then I'll just move on to something else. And yeah, they liked the fact I had a sports background. They figured they could teach me about leather, and that was it. I went and I stayed, and I think I just discovered my passion for it. And I think for me, it's because you can be one day in the tannery and you're talking to the guys who know how to make leather do what you want. My job was to bring trends and information and what the leather should look like and how we wanted it to perform for the footwear that we could see coming up in the sports market. And they would take just this vague trend information that I had in my head and they would turn it into the most amazing leathers. So the one day you're with those guys in the tannery. I love being in a tannery. There's honestly, it's like every day I walk through the tannery where I work. And then the next day you're working with a group of designers who are looking at the leathers, like a very different environment. But for me, it's this connection with the people that make it. I always say it's the people about making leather.
Absolutely. This is a great story, and I can attest to the addiction of tannery. It is addictive. I've seen in many different friends, colleagues, once you get into tannery, it just doesn't let you go. I don't know if it's the smell, I don't know if it's the environment, the look and the processes, but it is somehow magical and it just keeps attracting you every day. So this is really great. And currently you're serving as the chair of Leather Naturally, right?
That's
Correct?
right. Leather Naturally is a voluntary organisation. It's a not-for-profit, and it's manned by volunteers from around the industry. So we come from all parts of the supply chain, chemical companies, tanners, and so on. And essentially, we're there to help provide transparent and factual information to people who want to understand how to make leather responsibly and the advantages that that has.
Absolutely. I've seen you guys' great work, great presentation. You put that somehow complex technical information into understandable facts, the PDFs and visuals through your Instagram and through your website. So it's a great resource for anyone who wants to learn a little bit more about leather and any aspect of leather industry. I think it's a great resource. You can go to Leather Naturally website. We're going to put the links on the screen and the Instagram handle. Follow their accounts. They're constantly producing amazing content and highlighting some makers around the world. So beautiful work. I really thank you guys for that as well. And we're gonna do much more collaboration. I'm in contact with the organization, and we will do many more resources for people to understand leather better. And once we did that, we can get into the main topic of how people can read labels and understand what they're looking at when they're leather shopping. Since it's somehow stressful and confusing for some of us, we start to think like, oh, I don't know leather, I don't understand. I just start relying on the marketing. I start relying on the brand and the price as an indicator of the quality. But as some of my videos, as we all learn together, price is not always parallel to the quality of the leather you're getting. Sometimes, it could be good leather, but the price could be way, way, way high, and there's some other things involved. Or you could be getting a regular price item, and if you are not aware of some of the tricky labelings in the industry, you might be getting something subpar, even fake leather. So, as an expert, where do we start this conversation? How should we read labels when we're leather shopping?
I think in the first instance, make sure the label says leather. That's simple because according to labeling regulations, you have to say what the composition of different parts of a shoe, a garment, a bag are. So, say you're looking for a shoe, there are really two main parts of that, apart from the you can look for, and that is what is the upper and what is the lining. And it can be quite common to have a leather upper with a different sort of lining. Some people, like in a sports shoe, for example, you might have a textile wicking lining designed to do a specific job, or you can have a leather lining. So if you want an all leather shoe, then you should be looking for the upper, which has leather against it, and the lining should have leather against it. So these are the different component parts. It can be possible to combine different materials in a product, say mixing synthetic and leather for different aspects. And that's again, that's you've got to get really granular in your label then. What is the important part to me and which part of this product is leather?
Perfect. And so sometimes it says leather, but the tricky marketers actually find ways to get around this legal requirements. They start keeping the leather in the combination of the words, but they invented a genuine leather, which is a certain type of leathers they're using it for these days. Some people are using, honestly, they invented um, like vegan leathers, they invented faux leathers, they invented different types of things. They still say leather in it, leatherette. These are all the terms we see in the market today in different type of leather products. Which ones are the most tricky, most like deceitful that we need to pay attention in your experience?
I would say if you're looking for something that's leather, the only the key the the only word that's going to be used is leather. I think when you see other words attached to it, like vegan leather or faux leather, that's when you want to stop and think and go a little bit deeper because vegan leather is not a product. Vegan leather is a marketing term to give the consumer some idea of it's a descriptor, if you like. So they would use the word vegan to communicate that it doesn't have animal products or it's not from animal origin, but then the word leather, confusing because actually the official description of leather is that it is of animal origin. But I think in this case, they are using it as shorthand to describe the product that it's replacing. And somewhere along the line, this term has become confused with meaning that it's a greener product or a more eco friendly product. I mean, we did a survey, a consumer survey last year in conjunction with Leather UK, and we discovered that more than half of the people that we surveyed didn't know what vegan leather actually was. And that, again, that's when, sorry guys, but you've got to get into the detail. If something says it's vegan leather and you want to know actually what it's made of, you've got to get right into that composition label because in most countries around the world, it's a legal requirement that it tells you what that's made from. And the same if something says it's faux leather. Faux, I think, is a more obvious descriptor, fake. Um, but that's when you've got to look at the label and it will tell you what the percentage breakdown is or what the material is. This, I think, is particularly important, especially if you're looking to reduce your use of plastics, because you could be buying something that you think is more eco-friendly. Like, the confusing term of combining the word leather with the word vegan aside, you're buying something that you think is potentially more eco-friendly, only to discover that actually a large component of it, if not the entire component, is plastic.
Exactly. I think that's the most important part I'm trying to illustrate whenever I get this question, what do you think about vegan leather? Since vegan is a trendy term, it's a lifestyle I have huge respect for. I totally understand if you don't want to use items coming from animal sources. And again, when you put vegan and leather, it's like an oxymoron that
Exactly.
leather cannot be not come from an animal, but yet vegan. And I think there was a research also the consortium in Italy, vegetable tanneries consortium did.
Mm.
They published it in the last Linea Pale, I believe. Their leather, vegetable tan cowhides, was 95% biological material coming from nature, and the vegan leather, this plastic item, was 70% or more petroleum derivatives, which is, which takes much longer to um, stay in the earth and create much more pollution in the production and all that stuff.
Yeah, there was, I mean, that's the problem, because vegan leather doesn't mean one thing. It can be a variety of different materials that are made up of a number of different components. And there's a really interesting report if you want to get into the science. And you say that leather naturally has some really straightforward information, and we do, and that's really good. But for anyone that really wants to dive deeper in the science, we do host reports like this on our website. And this is from the Research Institute for Leather and Synthetic Materials, the FILK, the FILK report. And they actually looked at the breakdown of a number of, let's call them alternative materials for leather. And it shows you how much is biocomponent, how much is the synthetic. And then tested, it ran tests for the different mechanical properties that you would expect to get from material that has to make up shoes, bags, furniture, and so on.
Yes, that's I highly recommend you guys to check if you really get into details. They have really in-depth materials as well. Some of the PDFs was going like 95 pages. I was like, oh, this is great. Like I can geek out on leather here. It's great. And
There'll be a test
another
later.
aspect of the vegan leather, I know there are some.
We're going
Yeah,
to
well,
test you.
I think that would be the happiest test I will take, as tanneries being my Disneyland, I would definitely love to be tested on that. In the vegan leather side, I would say the true form of vegan leather that aligns with that mindset, at least from the people that I know in my life, my friends who has that vegan approach. I think there are people trying to develop materials, leather arts alternatives that are coming from truly vegetable sources like the cactus, the mushrooms, and
Mm.
some, I think, mangoes were employed in different form of structures to
Apples,
accomplish a
grapes.
material that may be an alternative to
Mm.
the leather. Yeah, apples, grapes. So I think these are at least coming closer to the philosophy of the vegan mindset being derived from vegetable sources, more sustainable versus the petroleum derivatives and plastics, as we mentioned. Unfortunately, though, most of the faux leathers that was in the past now being labeled as vegan to get the environment even more confusing with this new vegan trend. So that's the only part I truly want to seek more into developed alternatives truly coming from vegetable sources as vegan leather in my at least more authentic definition of vegan lifestyle.
Yeah, we need more sustainable materials for sure. And I think, definitely some of these alternative materials we're coming through could be very important, especially if they're taking a product like food waste and turning it into something that can be useful. And I think where we see the benefit of them is a replacement for plastic. And, when I talked about reading labels carefully to make sure you reduce your use of plastic, then something which is a combination of plant material and plastic. Obviously, the plastic at the moment is, or some sort of PU is you need in a lot of them just to give them some strength and stability right now. And I know, most of them are working to bring that down. So that's the advantage it can have is it is right now it's an option for people who want to, if they choose not to use animal products, then they're looking for an alternative that can also reduce their use of plastics. Because I know for some people that's their dilemma. That's the big no-no. We don't want to use animal products, but we don't want to use plastic either. And we
Right.
the world needs alternative materials. If it can deal with food waste too, then in the same way that leather deals with the byproduct from the food industry that would otherwise go to waste, then I think we're winning in a world that's trying not to waste anything.
Exactly. So that's a great point. If it's coming from a food waste and being upcycled as an alternative material,
Mm.
by all means, please develop things like that because at the end of the day, leather is one of those. Leather is a food waste that tanneries take and give it a second life. I call it probably the oldest form of upcycled materials in the world we use. So if we all eat meat, and I don't see that, I mean, not all, but a lot of people eat meat, and I don't see that going away tomorrow. And as long as this meat production happens, there is this rawhides coming out in an enormous pace that we can't even manage that waste unless we take and tan these leathers and give it a second life, which reduces the need for other materials like plastics and fabrics and other things we would use to make these shoes, bags, and wallets and belts we are making out of leather today. So when people ask like how sustainable is leather, this is usually my answer. Leather is really, really sustainable because it's an upcycling of a huge waste coming out of meat industry. I would like you to elaborate on this concept a little bit more since you guys have a lot of materials describing this.
Yeah, I think probably the simplest one for people to look at actually is just to go right to our fact sheet, which is leather is a recycled material, which essentially will tell you that unless we use them, you've got around 270 million hides worldwide that we have to put into waste, that have to go into landfill. And then not only have you put something in the ground, which is going to cause, and I think there's a study in the US that looked at the surplus emissions that would be created if we put all the hides in the ground, and it was something like 6 million tons. And then on top of that, you've got to produce other materials to replace the leather that you're now not using because you put all the hides in the ground. I feel truly that while we have the expertise to turn this waste product into leather, which I mean, it's phenomenal. You can make it soft enough for a pair of gloves. You can make it hard wearing enough for a hiking shoe. You can put it on a sofa. You can put it in a handbag. And we have the expertise to do that and to do that responsibly. Why would we not do that in a world that is actually looking to do more with less? And I think that feeds into the longevity advantage of leather, that it is something that lasts a long time. Someone said a great phrase to me, and I'm going to give it to you for free, which is leather doesn't wear out, it wears in. And
Perfectly said.
it is, and it's the perfect phrase. But you think of, you know, a leather jacket is really only good when it's 30 years old. That's when it's best. A leather jacket which has been passed down, like you almost want to give it to someone else to beat it up and wear it for you. Um, it's why they're so popular in vintage stores. You think about an old sofa that's been passed down through a family. Um, we make actually part of the company I work for in my day job. We make Danes and Hathaway. We make leather wallets for men. And the
Mhm.
thing that our customers love about them is that, like, you wear it, you put a wallet in your pocket, and you carry it around with you your entire life. And the way it wears and the pattern it develops, no one else's wallet will look like that because leather, it conforms to your body. It takes on those individual characteristics. No one else's wallet will look the same. There's something really personal about them. We've had back wallets that are many years old just to repair them because they mean so much emotionally to people.
Exactly. It is so much more than just a product that ages with you. You carry so much more than money in it. You carry
Yeah,
the pictures of your loved ones and all that stuff. So those are all emotional build-ups that goes onto that leather product. And again, it makes it a lot more than a product. It becomes a part of you, and that's only possible with leather, I think. I don't see other materials coming close to that sentimental feel when you use them.
I think it's something about that. Even if it's a little beat up, it still looks good. I have a handbag that's, I think, maybe 25 years old. And I don't know if you remember them, it was one of the original Todd's Diana bags. Princess Diana carried one. Um, the beautiful, beautiful aniline veg tan leather, pale, really pale. And I think most people would just be terrified to use it. Oh my God, it's raining. I don't want to bash it against anything. I use that bag every day for years and years and years. And yeah, it looks like it's taken on this patina now and it does have some wear damage and so on, but it still looks amazing. Still looks amazing. And I think people shouldn't be afraid of leather.
Describe vegetable tan aniline, a pale item, and it's 25 years old. I'm sure it's a lot more darker than where you started it with, right?
Yeah.
Vegetable tan leather gets towards a darker reddish brown as it oxidizes. So the true beauty of leather is coming from this natural characteristics of it and its aging process. It's not about this picture perfect item you bought, 10 years ago and it still looks the same.
Mm.
Leather doesn't work like that actually in its natural form. The heavier finishes you cover on top of it to protect and accomplish that look. If that's desired, it's perfectly fine. But truly artisan leathers that will age with you, you can pass on generations,
Mm.
is meant to build life marks, the scratches, the watermarks and things like that as you
Yeah,
described. And it only makes it more beautiful as year goes by.
that's it. That's so true. And I always say to people, because obviously being in the leather industry like you, I get asked a lot of questions about it. And I always say, just use it. You know what? If you love it, just use it. Don't tuck it away in the cupboard because it will get more beautiful. And I think actually that is when we repair items, I think that's the trick of repairing them too, is you don't want to make them look brand new. Sure, you can, like, you sort the stitching out and you freshen them up a little bit, but you don't want to erase the history of an item. And I can't think of anything else that does that in the same way that leather does.
How about genuine leather in the labeling? Like, I find that it's a very confusing use in today's world again. What do you think of it? What's your experience with that labeling practice now?
Maybe I say lower end products, and but I don't like to use that term. But sometimes, say if something is at the lower end of the price spectrum, people will use that term. But I've also seen it on really high end things, the phrase genuine leather used. And I think then what you get into, and again, we have a fact sheet on it, you will not be surprised to hear, is how to look at that leather. And a lot of your work is devoted to this, is to look at that leather and you know determine whether the the cost of the item makes it worth the value to you, because as you know, the cost and value are two different things. And there, I think there's a whole masterclass in how to look at different types of leather, because aniline leather with no cover on it at all, where you see right down into the grain. I mean, it's absolutely beautiful, and it can be very, very expensive because you're looking for something doesn't have any scars or marks, and especially if you're cutting big panels, you have to be really careful with the selection. tell me when I'm getting too tannery technical here, or we can geek out on the technical stuff. Um, but I think also sometimes the beauty in aniline leather is seeing those things, is seeing the natural marks of it. But also, I would say, you talk about leather that sometimes has more cover on it, that has a finish. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's a lower grade leather, because actually, again, as you'll know from your tanner experience, to put on a consistent, a consistent finish, which will stay on the leather and not crinkle and wear with flexing, that is a really difficult thing to do technically. So it doesn't
Yes.
necessarily mean lower cost. But what it will mean is that you can get a product that perhaps you can cut bigger pieces from, and they all look the same. If you're trying to create a product that is a consistent color and has a consistent look and feel, then having that finish on the leather can be an advantage. But a really good finish.
The genuine leather side, I'm gonna go back to it a little bit.
Mm,
As you said, we see it in the really high-end leathers. Sometimes people use it genuinely. They
they
call it
do,
genuine leather
yeah.
because they don't think about misusage of it. I've seen in beautiful wastable tan Italian leather belts that says
Mm.
genuine leather from Italy on it. I'm like, please don't use it because people abuse it too much. Just say aniline vegetable tan leather from Italy. It's a better description in today's market. I think it represents your product better, because so many people used it to label lower end of leathers that are legally uh, qualified to be called leather. The splits covered with a grain
Mm.
looking layer, and it's usually in the cheaper end of things. It's still leather, but most of the people are using the label for that. So if you're really making these anilines or full grains or top grains, whatever it is, just mention that aspect rather than just saying genuine leather. Give a couple more words to your consumer, like, oh, this is embossed top grain leather. Don't call it genuine leather. This is my call to leather makers, leather product makers, crafters, at least to do justice to their own creations. What would be your opinion to makers how to label their products?
Genuine leather is an overused term, and it has been devalued. And I think, I mean, again, one of the things we learned from our research was that around three-quarters of our respondents wanted clearer labeling. They wanted to better understand what they were buying. And, to describe something as full grain leather or aniline leather, I think is much clearer, because otherwise you're having to educate the consumer to do what we're talking about now, is to look at the leather and identify what it is and work out whether or not the cost of that item represents value to them.
In terms of these labeling, like more clear labeling initiatives, are you aware of any industry scaled initiatives to come up with a convention of let's label our products this way so it's more clear for consumers? I'm sure you guys are discussing these things. Maybe there are some projects you guys are part of. And if so, what keywords are going around in the circles? What keywords that leather consumers should be aware of and look for in their leather shopping, label reading
Well, I
practices?
think it's important to know that in certain countries, you can only use the term leather on leather. So I think at the moment it's Germany, Brazil, Italy, Portugal. If it ain't leather, you can't call it leather.
I didn't know that in some countries you can only call leather when it's leather. Oh, that's a great thing, but it clearly is not in US or Turkey where I was, part of this
No,
industry, but I wish it was.
for leather, which was that it had to be of animal origin, and it would not allow any materials that were not of animal origin to use that term leather. I think that's very important. I would say, from my point of view, is what I see is brands being more transparent about the leathers they use. So, very often, for example, and this is a growing trend I see, they will talk about the tannery they get their leather from. So, for example, they will say this comes from a leather working group tannery, so that the consumer will know that it's
Hmm.
responsibly made and it's been audited and certified as such. And I see this as a growing trend, and I think this is a very positive thing, and a reassurance that consumers can take away with them. But what I also see, and I would say a few years ago, there was, I suppose, there seemed to be less education about leather around, and people keen to make sweeping statements about it that they didn't really understand, facts that were untrue. And I see that changing in the public perception now, is that people actually, and I think it comes from this backlash against greenwashing, is that people are prepared to dig a little bit deeper and go, no, tell me more.
I am going to go to some of your specialty areas here. Whenever you were introducing how you got into leather, in developing sports performance leather
Mm.
for shoes, and maybe just it would be an interesting answer we might hear from you. How does a sports performance leather, for a sports shoe, differ from a dress shoe? What are the main differences? What do you guys consider? What kind of requirements, or how do you accomplish those requirements at what stages of leather making? Can you provide a little bit more light into audience that they may not know? What's the difference that Air Jordans use from a shoe that, Ellen Edmonds use for dressmaking?
Something like a hiking boot, you have a very specific requirement. You want the leather to be highly water resistant, but it needs to be breathable too. You have to have something that's protected, particularly if it's what I would call a high octane shoe, where you're going to use it perhaps when you get hot and sweaty. You need something that protects against perspiration, because, as you will know, sweat detans leather. It takes the goodness out, and it will go hard and crunchy. And you also, if you're going to wear it in a wet environment, you need something that won't absorb water as much. You can't have it like if a dress shoe gets very wet, if you get a walking boot that gets very wet, you can't have that, because it will just get heavy, and it will be to the detriment of whatever activity you're doing. It will be less comfortable. So in a sports leather, we're looking for something that will retain its comfort for a long time, and actually retain that in more adverse conditions. Now, what we do at Pitars is we do that in the tantrum. Not giving away too many secrets here, but we do. It happens, and you'll know about the chemistry of making leather. So we do it at the same time we do the retan, and the the chemicals that we use to bring these benefits, they permanently bond with the fibers of the leather, so they form this protective coating. Now, the advantage that has is it doesn't allow the leather to absorb very much water. When the water it does absorb, it will dry very quickly. It keeps your foot dry. Because it's protected, it stays soft and comfortable. The amazing thing about this particular process is, because it isn't applied to the finish, it's not something you spray on. If you scuff the leather or you damage a surface, it doesn't matter, because the process is bonded right the way through. So it will continue to perform. But I think one of the best benefits of all is it doesn't need topping up. You don't need to keep adding something to it to keep the water resistance there. So in terms of the long-term impact, you're not actually having to use further resources to maintain the performance of it. And you can modify this chemistry to work across gloves as well. And you can make leather for gloves, for example. You can make it more abrasion resistant. You can make it more grippy. And I think it's interesting you talk about the difference between a dress shoe and an active shoe, because what we see happening more now is that And I think this has been a little bit since the pandemic, um, where people got used to wearing shoes that were way more comfortable and were quite often wearing, their outdoor or their sports shoes for general use. But again, tied in with this idea of people wanting to consume less or do more with fewer things, we see people actually blending the categories. So making shoes that are more like dress shoes, but making them with a leather that's designed for the sports market. So you can wear your shoe to a meeting and you can look smart enough, but actually, if it's raining on the street or you want to go for a walk at the weekend on a, trail that's a little bit mucky, then, the leather's got your back. And I think for me, this is something that leather can do. I think it's amazing. And I really like this idea of, we call it cross functionality, cross functional products.
I'm noticing more and more of this blended design that has more of the look of a sports shoe, comfortable shoe with more rubber undersoles and, reminding me the sports shoes, but made with more of the aniline or flat grain surface leathers, not more of that pigmented or performance finished that we saw in the sports shoes before. And that looks actually pretty attractive to me too. I have a few of those things and I really like it. So as you said, we're trying to do more with less stuff.
Mm,
We try to embed more function into single products as we learn and try to combine things. So I think it's a good thing. I'm excited to see that. And uh, thank you for describing how that performance requirements are met in the drums, in the tanning and retanning. So the leather is actually designed water resistant from the tannery, which is going to stay with the leather, for the length of its life. And the great part is you don't have to maintain it. All these chemicals and recipes are designed in so long hours, so
mm,
long tests that the chemicals infused in the leather is going to stay there. So you don't have to do this maintenance. That's another question I keep getting, we keep getting at my brand too, like how do I maintain my leather? Well, thankfully, tanning industry is developing faster and faster every day. Most of the leathers today we do doesn't require much maintenance,
no.
in my opinion. Since we kind of come to this area, what do you say about the leather maintenance to leather consumers here?
Well, like you, I get asked a lot of questions about it, and particularly we have people that email us because they've bought branded products that are made without leathers, and they want to know how to maintain them. To which I normally just say, yeah, just wipe the dirt off and let it dry naturally, and you don't actually need to do much.
That's
And
it.
I would, align this with what I said earlier about don't be precious with leather. Don't worry about using it if you think it's going to get dirty, because actually, as you say, leather is pretty easy to clean now. And with some of when you tan in performance benefits, you're not continually having to rub it with creams and oils.
Exactly. I think we have this like older concept of vegetable tanned saddlery kind of leathers in our mind for whatever reason it established itself that you have to, condition them, milk them or oil them time to time because they tend to dry, old vegetable tanned leathers tend to dry, they're under the sun, all that stuff, and they might start crackling, which is the case still in some of the supernatural vegetable tan leathers that used outdoors in celery maybe. But most of the other leathers we do in the tannery these days, I think I'm telling people, as you said, like just wipe it off, let it dry. And I would even refrain from applying something because actually you are refinishing the
Mm.
leather, and you don't know actually what's going to happen, how your leather is going to react to the chemical you have, since it's impossible to know how the leather was done and what chemical you're holding in your hand. So it's really impossible to say what the reaction will be. If you must do something, just apply it in a discrete area. If you don't mind the result, then go all over, but don't go all over the place right off the bat, and you may not like the results by ruining your product. That's my advice so far. People who ask me this question.
Yeah, I say the same thing to people if they say if they want
Okay.
to rub something on it. I always say try it in a small part first, because especially if it's a pale leather, you will likely change the color by what you put on it. And if you're not going to like that appearance, then
Very
don't do
likely,
it.
yeah.
And so, I think a light touch is a good thing.
Is there anything else you would like to add in this context that would be helpful to our audience? And what resources you may recommend them to check on leather naturally around leather, leather labels, reading the leather, sustainability matters, and where do they find those things?
The best place to start on the Leather Naturally website is to go to our fact sheets. If you want to understand the impact of not using leather, leather is a recycled material. It's just a really good one to give you the facts. This is what would happen if we don't use it. These are the things we make leather into. There is also a fact sheet on leather, on labeling, the topic we've been discussing today, and the different things that you may see, what they may actually be made from, how to understand the label on that. There is also a good article on how to tell the difference between synthetic leather and real leather.
Yeah, thank you guys for putting those materials out for the service of Leather Universe. I really appreciate that. We're gonna come back to you guys to ask for more help, resources, and maybe more guests into different discussing different topics on this podcast. I truly appreciate your expertise, knowledge, and spending the time with us today, helping people understand and experience leather better. Thanking our audience wherever you watched or listened to this podcast. Every week on Mondays, we will have a different professional coming from the leather industry to discuss a different aspect of leather and how we can experience it better. So don't forget to subscribe and follow our accounts and keep improving your leather savvy. Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate you being here, and we'll see you next week.